One quiet afternoon after class, Professor Tom sat alone in his office. Outside the window, students hurried across the campus courtyard. Some walked quickly while staring at their phones. Others rushed toward the library. Everyone seemed to be chasing something. As he watched them, the professor sighed softly, because their behavior reminded him of someone he once knew very well. Many years earlier, he had a close friend named Michael. Michael's ambition. Michael had been one of the most brilliant students at the university. Everyone admired his intelligence and determination. Even as a young man, he worked harder than anyone else. Late nights studying, early mornings preparing for opportunities. He believed that if he pushed himself hard enough, success would surely follow. And eventually, it did. After graduating, Michael built an impressive career in finance. His income grew quickly. He bought a beautiful house. He drove expensive cars. To everyone around him, Michael looked like a perfect example of success. But the more successful he became, the busier his life grew. His workdays became longer. His responsibilities increased. He often stayed in the office late into the night. Sometimes his friends invited him to dinner, but he was always too busy. His wife planned vacations, but he postponed them. Even when he visited his parents, his mind was still focused on work. Whenever someone asked him why he pushed himself so hard, Michael would simply say, "I'm doing this for the future. I just need to work harder now." The phone call. Years passed. Then one day, Professor Tom received a phone call he would never forget. Michael had collapsed from extreme exhaustion and stress. When the professor visited him in the hospital, he saw something that deeply saddened him. His confident and energetic friend now looked weak and tired. The doctors explained that years of constant pressure had taken a serious toll on his health. Sitting beside the hospital bed, Professor Tom listened quietly as his friend spoke. Michael looked at him with regret in his eyes. "I thought I had time," he whispered. "I thought the important things could wait." Those words stayed with Professor Tom for the rest of his life. The lesson begins. Years later, whenever Professor Tom watched his students rushing through life, he wondered if they were slowly making the same mistake. So one morning, he decided to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The next day, he walked into the classroom carrying a large glass jar and a small bag. The students looked up curiously. It was unusual for their professor to bring objects to class. Without saying a word, he placed the empty glass jar on the desk at the front of the room. Then he reached into his bag and took out several large rocks. The room grew quiet. One by one, he carefully placed the rocks into the jar. The students watched as the jar slowly filled. When the rocks reached the top, Professor Tom looked at the class. "Is the jar full?" he asked. Most of the students nodded. "Yes," one student said, "it's full." The pebbles. The professor smiled slightly. Then he reached into his bag again and took out a container filled with small pebbles. Slowly, he poured the pebbles into the jar. The tiny stones rolled between the large rocks and filled the spaces between them. He gently shook the jar so the pebbles settled deeper. Then he looked at the class again. "Is the jar full now?" This time the students hesitated. "Maybe," one student replied. The sand. Once again, the professor reached into his bag. This time he pulled out a small bag of sand. Without speaking, he slowly poured the sand into the jar. The grains slipped through every tiny space between the rocks and pebbles. Gradually, the jar became completely full. Now there was no space left. The classroom was silent. Everyone was waiting to understand the meaning behind the strange demonstration. The meaning. Professor Tom placed his hands on the desk. "This jar," he said gently, "represents your life." He pointed to the large rocks. "These rocks are the most important things in your life. Your family, your health, your dreams, and the people you love." Then he pointed to the pebbles. "These pebbles represent the things that matter, but are not the most important. Your job, your studies, your house, your possessions." Finally, he pointed to the sand. "The sand represents everything else. The small distractions, the minor worries, the things that quietly fill up our lives." Then he paused. "If you had filled the jar with sand first," he continued, "there would have been no room for the rocks. The same is true for life. If you spend all your time and energy on small things, you will have no room left for what truly matters." The coffee moment. Just as the students believed the lesson was finished, Professor Tom reached under the desk and picked up something unexpected: a simple cup of coffee. The class laughed softly. Slowly, the professor poured the coffee into the jar. The liquid flowed between the sand and settled into the tiny spaces that remained. The students stared in amazement. Even after the rocks, the pebbles, and the sand, there was still room for the coffee. Professor Tom smiled. "I want you to remember one more thing," he said. "No matter how busy life becomes, there is always room for a cup of coffee with a friend." The students laughed again, but they understood. Life should never become so full of responsibilities that we forget the simple moments that bring happiness. Moments of rest, moments of laughter, moments shared with the people we care about. Finally, years later, many of those students would forget the exams they took in that classroom. They would forget the lectures and assignments, but they would never forget the day their professor brought a simple glass jar, a handful of rocks, and a cup of coffee, and showed them how to live. If you enjoyed this story and the lesson it carries, take a moment to like the video. It helps more people discover these timeless lessons. You can also share this story with someone who might need this reminder today. And if you enjoy meaningful stories that reveal wisdom about life, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next lesson. Because sometimes, the simplest stories can teach us the most important truths. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.